Hello, everybody. This would be my second recording of a first video. I've done videos before, but I'm deciding to take this serious now, I guess. Um, I originally was gonna do a Dark Souls 3 video, kind of starting where uh, I thought Dark Souls 3 would be a good start, to be honest. It's a game that gives, rage, but also funny moments, and then it's like, oh my god, you beat that boss, whatever, that kind of stuff. But I've been really into reading, at least right at this very second, and sitting down and having to re-record the Dark Souls 3 video because my audio was already crappy as it was not a good look on me. So, hello, welcome. Um, I hope you enjoy reading, or maybe just listening to somebody read. Doesn't really matter to me. Don't expect audible level of voice acting. I mean, I'll definitely try to make it apparent that I'm reading voices and lines and stuff, but if it's a female, I am not going high pitch. I can tell you that. Um, this book is called The Lone Wanderer. It's got clones and world hopping lit RPG. To anyone that doesn't know what lit RPG is, it's basically you're reading a book. They have some system, kind of like MMOs of World of Warcraft would use, and you can see like your stat page. You can see how many spells you have, how your stats are laid out, so on and so forth. When it comes to that, if there's anything new to the stats, I'll read them out, especially like the first time that we read them, or we read his stats, I'll read it out. But I feel like if it comes up too much, it would just be kind of annoying for both me and you if I were to, uh, you know, do that. I will admit, I have already begun reading this one. I was trying to find a second book to read, and I just decided, you know what? Might as well just stick with what I'm already reading, and we'll call it a day. So, with that being said, and I got my ramble out the way, let's dive into the book. Also, don't know how many chapters I'm going to do, just kind of seeing how it goes, and this will be unedited. I am not editing this. I'm still learning how to do that. That'll be for a gaming video, but for this, purely unedited. So if I fuck up, I fuck up, and we call it a day. So, anyway. Ugh, it feels like all of my nerves were ripped out of my body and then stomped on for good measure. The last thing Percy remembered was the thrill of finally reaching Orange after a decade of relentless effort. The jeers and sneers from his cousins and uncles had only pushed him onward. He'd done it, tripled his remaining lifespan, and achieved a new level of power. He's made it. His first act had been to try tapping into his family's bloodline once more. The clone ability had always eluded him, but perhaps now, with his newly strengthened core, things would be different. He remembered the initial rush of mana and then pain. A lot of pain. A world of pain. I'm not exactly an expert, but I don't think excruciating agony is a common side effect of using a bloodline ability. As he fought to open his eyes, he was greeted by a strange sight. A creature with humanoid features, but certainly not human, stood before him. Its skin was pale as milk and his eyes pitch black, resembling obsidian orbs that glimmered with an emotion Percy couldn't quite discern. Worry, perhaps? The creature's strained smile and the tightly clenched fists at the edge of the crib betrayed his concern. There was another standing opposite the first, this one bulkier. A male? It was hard to tell. Both were hairless and wore baggy robes, concealing any distinguishing traits. Percy raised his hands with difficulty, noticing they were tiny and the same pale color as the giants around him. His skin was smooth as porcelain. What's happening? Who are these people? He tried to speak, to ask a question, but no sound emerged. To his horror, he realized he couldn't breathe. The female, at least he thought it was female, panicked. Moving a device to his mouth and casting an air spell, a breath was forced into his lungs, and though it hurt, it kept him conscious. Barely. Scanning his surroundings, he noticed the walls were sleek, made of polished material. They definitely didn't have anything of the sort back on Remoire? We'll go with Remoire. Works for me. Strange decorations adorned the room. There was a painting that seemed to have been drawn in 3 dimensions somehow. Through the window he glimpsed 3 suns, green, yellow, and blue, illuminating a turquoise sky. At any other time, Percy might have appreciated the novelty of the situation. Right now, however, it only brought him unease. Desperately, he turned to the only source of familiarity he could think of, his status tab. He summoned it, hoping it still worked. Guhat, Percival's clone. What the hell? His relief at being able to check his status was quickly replaced by shock. Guhat was probably the name given to this body, but what did it mean by Percival's clone? Wasn't he the real Percy? Wait, clone? I succeeded? Under other circumstances, he would be ecstatic. His family had given him a ton of grief over his inability to use it. Everyone, Percy included, thought he simply hadn't inherited it. But this wasn't how it was supposed to work. Fueled by their life affinity, the Avalon House's bloodline allowed them to cultivate a biological copy of themselves to delegate dangerous or tedious tasks to. Did I inherit a mutated version, or is it because I don't have the life affinity? Percy had never been sure of his affinity. The standard test at age 5 had shown nothing, but there was a slim chance he had a rare affinity it couldn't detect. Of course, better tests existed, but his family hadn't thought it would be worth the resources on a red core like him. Let's see what I'm dealing with here, he thought, focusing on his status once more. Guhat, Percival's clone, Manicores. Manicore 1 is red, Manicore 2 is red. And the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Shh. What? Losing his orange core stung given how long it took to get there, but it made sense since he was in a new infant body. 2 cores, on the other hand? He'd never heard of anyone possessing more than 1. Well, that wasn't quite right. Percy had never heard of a human possessing multiple cores, but he did vaguely recall a rumor of an alien race famous for that. What were they called? The Moy somethings? He couldn't remember the exact term, but they stood out even among countless species the Divine Order protected his world from. And now I get to be one of them? His eyes almost sparkled with hope, but he quickly quashed the optimism. What was he thinking? He was just a botched clone that couldn't survive much longer. His new body barely functioned. He couldn't even breathe without assistance. Everything hurt, and he felt himself beginning to collapse. Even if he survived, both his cores were red, leaving him at the bottom of the pecking order here as well. No, I can't give up so easily. I want to live. I want a chance. He clawed desperately at his fading consciousness. The pain was excruciating, as if he were being ground to dust, but he refused to give up. He didn't care. He was just a clone. He didn't care his cores were red. He had to fight with what he had, to live with what he had, to make the most of what he had. But sometimes, sheer will wasn't enough. The air affinity spell was beginning to hurt more than it helped. His eyes felt like it was about to burst, darkness seeping into his vision. At the same time, an inescapable force pulled him, slowly prying him out of his broken body. As Guhat's eyes closed, the blurry silhouettes of the couple he guessed were his parents faded, their distraught cries replaced by silence. His final thought was a bitter one. Sorry for putting you guys through this. Percy was pulled toward a certain direction. It was as if a tightrope was glued to his back, forcing him to travel, to plunge through a seemingly infinite darkness. Unable to resist, he couldn't tell how long it took. Maybe a week, a year, a century? Either way, his mind was murky, his thoughts failing to fully form. Perhaps this was purgatory, his punishment for casting that ability. It's not like he'd known what it would bring, but he appeared destined to pay the price all the same. At least it wasn't so bad. He was at peace. The pain was gone. Until it wasn't. A throbbing headache was the first sensation, followed by warmth. He instinctively took a breath, and then another, and then a third, ecstatic to have functioning lungs again. Next he tried prying his eyes open, but his sight was blocked by something wet. A towel? He tried lifting his hands, but his limbs were weak. In the end, he shrugged. Or he would have if he could. Instead, he just remained in that position, enjoying the rhythmic sound of his own heartbeat. Did they manage to fix me? He opened his status once again, but what greeted him wasn't at all what he expected. Manicores. Manicore 1 is orange, Manicore 2 is a seed, and his bloodline is clone. Create a copy of yourself, a Vex Fairy, by affinity. Holy shit! The shock somehow gave him enough energy to sit up, the wet towel falling from his face. Glancing around, he found he was back in his room. His human room. His human body. No Guhat or Percival's clone? I guess the clone's memories return to me when it dies. He exhaled in relief. Not only was he somehow still alive, but it appeared he wouldn't be condemning a version of him to a horrible fate every time he used his bloodline. More importantly, there it is. My orange core is back, and also the clone bloodline. This was Percy's first time seeing his bloodline listed in his status. Not because he didn't have it before now, but both bloodline and core affinities were fixed from birth. Naturally, he had clone his whole life, he just hadn't known. The status page wasn't I can't pronounce that word correctly. Omniscient. Thank you, brain. The only things it could detect through the simple test most kids underwent at age 5 were the starting grade of one's mana core and the common elemental affinities. As for rarer affinities and bloodlines, those required a more specialized investigation, which was only reserved for kids lucky to be born at orange or higher. The rest had to either earn money to pay for the test, or to slowly discover their affinities and bloodline, if they even had any, on their own. But what is this section with the question marks? I didn't read that. He frowned. He had never seen or heard anything like that. Still, most of its contents weren't new. This section seemed to contain 3 separate items. One was access to the status itself, which everyone had. Another was access to his bloodline. It appeared to be like a hidden section. Did it become visible because I brought this other thing back? Percy wasn't sure what to make of this. He seemed to have partially retained the unique trait of the alien body, but not the complete version. His second core was in a dormant state, at a grade below even red. He wasn't sure if it could be salvaged. Either way, this is good. His core had advanced to orange, and it turned out he did have the clone despite what everyone told him. Finally, he probably had a rare affinity too. At least he couldn't imagine what he'd done with the pure mana. Even if I can't get to the second core to work, I'm still better off than before. Not that he would even try, of course. He was about to make a mental checklist of things he needed to do when the door opened. "Percy!" a female voice yelled. His ears were sensitive, the shout giving him a buzz. Still, he barely raised his arms to shield himself from the incoming aquamarine-haired missile. A silhouette leapt on top of him, the two bouncing on the mattress. She hugged him tightly, as if he was about to disappear. "It's all right, Elaine. I'm all right." The girl hugging him, Elaine, was the only member of his family who didn't treat him like shit. In fact, the only reason he had been kicked out entirely was probably because Elaine had been born at yellow, which made her one of the more talented members of the house. Naturally, it gave her some sway with their grandpa. "What do you mean you're all right?" she yelled. "I found you on the floor. You've been out cold for a week. I had to use my water magic to feed you soup." Percy raised an eyebrow. He hadn't quite realized he'd been unconscious for so long. He felt a pang of guilt for worrying her, but also a fuzzy feeling in his chest. If it wasn't for Elaine, they'd probably have left him to die. That's assuming they even realized he was missing. "I'm sorry. I tried to use clone upon advancing, and I had a weird interaction with my affinity." Elaine let go of him, covering her mouth in surprise. "Advancing?" she asked as she closed her eyes, trying to sense his mana. "Oh my god, you've reached orange!" Percy rolled his eyes at her reaction. He knew she was just happy for him, but it wasn't that strange that he had advanced. Most people took about 10 years for their first promotion, so reaching orange at 15 was pretty much expected of him. If anything, nobles typically had access to resources, doubling their purification speed. All his cousins had advanced at 10. Sadly, those resources weren't abundant enough to be wasted on the lowly reds. The world of Remoir was a cruel one, where the talented were showered with resources, letting them grow even faster, while the rest were left in the dust. Elaine, who was roughly the same age as him, had already advanced to green years ago. In any case, it wasn't only a few seconds later that she seemed to grasp the rest of what he said. "Wait, you said you have clone and an affinity? I told Grandpa to test you properly before writing you off." "Yeah, right. As if Baldy wouldn't waste a copper on his worst grandkid," Percy chuckled. Elaine flicked his forehead, causing him to wince. "Stop calling him that! I know he needs to start treating you better, but this isn't helping." Percy wanted to protest that it was just a shorthand for the guy's name. Archibald. Baldy. Also, he didn't have a single hair on his head, so it fit. But they'd had that conversation before, and he was too tired to get into it again. In the end, he shrugged. Well, this is all wonderful news. But have you figured out what your affinity is? She spoke again. Percy shook his head. No, but I'm 100% sure I do have one. It wasn't just optimism speaking. Bloodlines were hereditary. Occasionally, somebody would fall to inherit one from their parents, and on even rarer occasions, their bloodline would mutate into a new direction. Still, for the most part, they were passed along intact. Affinities were less hereditary. Sometimes one would inherit one from their parents, other times they wouldn't. But there were exceptions. The clone bloodline his family possessed was strongly correlated with a rare life affinity. Excuse me. Most members of the Avalon house tended to inherit both, while few got neither. It was a potent combination which made their family one of the stronger noble houses, even though they lacked a white core. Still, there had been instances over the centuries when individuals would be born with the clone bloodline and a different affinity, and there had even been cases where people had the bloodline and no affinity. But no other combination ever did anything noteworthy. The only explanation for Percy's misadventure was that he had an affinity never seen before in his family. Then we need to ask Grandpa to get you a proper test, Elaine said, grabbing him by the forearm. He nearly stumbled as he was pulled, his legs still a little bit wobbly, but he managed to follow her without failing. Truth be told, Percy wasn't exactly thrilled at the prospect of asking his grandpa for a favor. The man never dined, I think? Deigned to give him anything, despite the rosier version of him in Elaine's head. Still, he needed to figure out what his affinity was before he could even begin to understand how to use it. If he had to pay for the test himself, it would take him several more years, as he'd already used up his savings for the advancement, so in the end, he swallowed his pride and hoped his cousin would help advocate his case for him. Besides, Baldy had something else he needed. A potent source of life mana, huh? I bet that qualifies. Chapter 3. A Meeting with Baldy. Probably should have been reading those chapters, but oh well. Come in, an authoritative voice said. Elaine opened the door, dragging Percy behind her. The two found a man sitting at his desk, the afternoon sun reflected off the top of his head. Despite his shaved scalp, he didn't look old. His appearance was that of a burly man still in his late 20s, even though he had lived for centuries. Grandpa, the girl said, clearly eager to share the good news. Archibald lifted his eyes, his gaze briefly lingering on Percy before it returned to the documents he was reading. The latter rolled his eyes, realizing this was already a lost cause, but his cheerful cousin didn't seem ready to give up just yet. She bit her lower lip for a moment before speaking again. Grandpa, Percy is okay, The answer is no. The man cut her short. Just hear me out. He has managed to... Elaine! Archibald stopped her again. I can tell he's at Orange. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. You know that already. The girl deflated, looking down at her feet. On Remoir, the most important trait determining one's achievements in life was the grade of their mana core at birth. Sure, one could continue to advance throughout their lives, but each promotion was exponentially more difficult than the one before. The first typically required about a decade, the second a century, the third a millennium, and so on. Having access to more valuable resources could have each of those milestones, of course, but that didn't affect the way they scaled. At the same time, each subsequent grade typically tripled one's physical and magical ability as well as their remaining lifespan. Someone who spent their whole life at Red would only live about 80 years at most, while somebody at Orange would get to 40. Naturally, this meant that someone like Percy would never get to Green in his life. Having reached Orange at 15, he could hope to reach Yellow by 115, and then remain stuck at that level until he died of the old age at 40. Or 400, I apologize. Even if his grandpa decided to treat him to the same resources his cousin had access to, and he reached Yellow by 65, he would only live to about 500, which wouldn't be enough for the next grade. By comparison, someone born at Orange, just one grade above Percy, could potentially live for thousands of years and reach all the way to Blue, 2 grades above him. As for those born at Yellow, like Elaine and Archibald, they could even reach Violet and White, living up to 40,000 years. Percy's grandpa was already at Violet, having lived for over 700, but he still had several millennia of lifespan left, as well as the hope of reaching White. Elaine clenched her fists. He could still be of value to the family. His mana core and lifespan may be capped at yellow, but he can still pass his bloodline and affinity on, she said. For the first time since those two walked into the room, Archibald raised his eyebrows. He tossed another look at his grandson, this time not so quick to dismiss him. "You've used clone?" he asked. Percy nodded. "Actually used it?" "There have been others without the life affinity in the past, but water clones and pure clones just disperse." Archibald asked again. "It definitely did something interesting. As for what exactly, I don't fully understand it yet." His grandpa furrowed his brows at the implication, noticing that Elaine was over the moon. "See? Even if Percy can't become too powerful himself, his kids could start a new branch of the family. We should invest in him." Archibald tapped his fingers on the mahogany desk for a few seconds, seemingly lost in thought. "What you said makes some sense. We've never had another useful affinity paired with clone. If the new bundle is truly useful and easy to pass on, it could indeed be good for the family," he said. Elaine clapped her hands, excited to receive a positive response, but her grandpa spoke again. "However, that doesn't mean we should spend cultivation resources on Percy. 400 years are more than enough for him to sire plenty of children. He doesn't need to be stronger to do that." Percy grit his teeth. As much as he would have liked those resources, he was getting more annoyed by the callousness of his grandpa, treating him more like an asset than family. Still, he had agreed to follow Elaine for a reason, so he didn't let it get to him as he spoke again. "I don't want your cultivation resources. I'm only asking for a better affinity test. After all, that can both help us figure out what bloodline works in my case." The man looked him in the eyes for a while. "Very well. Gawain will accompany you for the trip. Elaine, too. She can use some experience." Archibald turned back to the scroll, not leaving much for debate. Still, this worked for Percy and Elaine, too, so they had rushed out of the office before their grandpa changed his mind. As they walked back to his room, he replayed the conversation in his mind. His hands balled into fists, drained of all color. Faced with his grandfather's coldness, Percy had come close to spilling the beans on his second mana core. He so wanted to see Baldy's face twist as he learned the grandson he treated like trash had achieved something no human ever had. Not the white cores, not even the lofty existences in the divine order could boast such a feat. He had stolen the most important secret of one of the strongest races in the universe. He had done that with a worthless orange core. But he held himself back. First of all, it sounded quite unbelievable, and he couldn't exactly prove it. Speaking of the event, might have made his grandpa think he was lying about the whole thing and robbed him of the affinity test. More importantly, he owed him nothing. If it wasn't for Elaine, he would have left this shitty family already. Whatever his second core meant for him, he would discover on his own and forge his own path. His biggest regret was he needed to get close to Grandpa's shaker tree. It was his family's most prized possession, and he hoped it was precisely the potent source of life mana he needed to germinate the seed. Let's leave it for now. If Baldy was so stingy with the affinity test and the cultivation resources, there's no chance he'd let me anywhere near that tree in a million years. But it didn't matter. He knew where it was. He could figure out a way to sneak there later. Besides, he still needed to find a source of mind mana for this to work. Thinking of something, he grinned. As it so happened, the advanced affinity test would be held at precisely such a place. The duo were about to enter Percy's room, but he stopped at the entrance. This caused Elaine to look at him in concern. "Percy, don't let this get to you. If your affinity really is really useful, we can convince him to give you more resources later." He chuckled. "It's not that. I've just realized I even tried practicing with my core since it evolved. Between everything that happened with my bloodline, I never got the chance." As he was about to head to the training grounds, she grabbed his arm again. "Seriously? You were in a coma for a week and we were about to head out in a couple days. What you need right now is to get some rest." Percy looked her in the eyes as his lips curled and parted. Smiling, he said, "Thanks." Seeing her forehead crease in confusion, he hurriedly added, "For caring. You're the only one who does, but I still need to do this." Then he walked away, leaving her behind. It was true he could use some sleep. His mind was exhausted, his body weak, but he still had to get stronger soon. He understood there weren't many people he could rely on, no handouts for him. Everything he needed, he had to fight for. Soon he reached the training grounds, just a section of the garden, really. He briefly paused to appreciate the birds chirping on the trees and the squirrels bolting up and down their trunks. Then he walked to the middle of the grass, facing a wide, dead oak tree that people typically use for target practice. Nobody else was around right now. His cousins rarely trained. They were mostly content lazing around and gulping expensive elixirs that cleansed their cores and lengthened their lives. They didn't need to practice their magic to be stronger than the likes of him. Shaking irritating thoughts away, he raised his palm towards the aged trunk and willed his mana to accumulate in his hand. He held it. Under the pressure in both his core and mind became unbearable. And then he released it. A faint distortion phased through the tree, but it didn't do much else. Percy wasn't exactly surprised. His unknown affinity had done nothing back at Red. Besides giving people a slight chilling sensation, it was to the point that nobody was even sure he had an affinity back then. But now, he knew he did. So, he was determined to make it count. He gathered more mana, this time holding it a moment longer and trying to condense it even further before firing. It still didn't do anything, but he didn't care. Again. He kept firing, bolt after bolt, minute after minute, hour after hour. Every so often he would take a break to refill his core before resuming his practice. By the time he fell to his knees, the sun had already set. He had practiced as long as he could, and then some. But it still wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Not yet. They all looked down on him. He didn't care about the most of them. He was used to it by now, but he cared that Elaine looked down on him. Unlike the others, she didn't do it on purpose. She didn't do it maliciously, but she did it all the same. She had been surprised he had reached Orange at 15, as if that wasn't some great achievement. She had pushed him to beg for scraps from their grandpa, and it stung so fucking much. But he'd never give up on himself. He was the only one who knew. His heart too thrummed with ambition, and one day he would show them. He would show them all. And that's where I'll be stopping for right now. I hope you enjoyed me reading this. We will continue on Chapter 4, Whistling Woods. If you guys if you want more, please like the video, subscribe, do whatever you gotta do. I will be streaming on Twitch, ghosthound_J right here at the top, if you guys can see it, if you're awake, or maybe you fell asleep, I don't know. Yeah, recommend friends to me. Do whatever you gotta do. I'm mainly doing this for fun, and if it ever gets to the point that I get to do this for a living, then I will definitely not be upset. This has always been my dream, and I've always been kind of too scared to do it, really. But I'm willing to give it a go now that I finally have a PC. So, thank you again. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Bye-bye.